All right. Hey, folks. So today we're going to be talking about diet, fat loss. So, how hard you should diet, also how long you should diet for, and sort of what is the best standard practice and where are the exceptions to the rule. So, the context for this is summer is approaching, and I've got quite a few clients who are beginning a fat loss phase now. And it's important, I think, to clarify some of these measures of dieting progress so that people have the right expectations going in. They're working hard enough, they know what to expect, or they're not going too hard because it could backfire. So it's wise to provide clarification and not just say diet harder, which I think a lot of people resort to. So anyway, firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. If you have any questions or comments, pop them down below. And if you'd like to work with me on your own strength and physique goals, there's a link in the description. So let's get started. Right. So firstly, how do we know we are dropping body fat? Okay. Well, this might sound like a very elementary question, but I still get these misunderstandings. So I want to lead off with this. So firstly, the scale should move, right? You should be measuring yourself on the scale, and the scale should move. Now, a common sort of statement that I get is if people haven't moved the scale, they go, maybe I've gained muscle. Now, I think there's a problem with that. And it needs to be addressed immediately. If the client or if you guys are thinking, well, actually, I've not dropped any weight this week, maybe I've just gained some muscle, I think it needs to be understood that weight fluctuations are mostly down to water, and they're not down to fat and muscle changes dramatically. Okay, so if you've gained like a pound or two or whatever, or if you've maintained the same weight, but you think you've lost 1 or 2 pounds and you think you've gained that back in muscle, it's not going to happen in the course of a week. Muscle gain is so much slower than fat loss. It's insane. Like if you were to lose 10 pounds of fat, a committed individual could probably do that in anywhere between 10 to 15 weeks. To gain 10 pounds of muscle, you'd have to be lucky to do that in a year's time. Depending on how advanced you are, it might take you 10 years. So the whole maybe I've gained muscle, that's why the scale hasn't changed, doesn't really cut it for most people, and that's something which needs to be stated right from the off. So if the scale hasn't moved, it's not because you've just magicked muscle. Next thing is people say, which is kind of connected, is they say, I'm happy with my weight, but I just want to lose fat. That's, again, very, very sort of common thing that people say. I think with that, firstly, a lot of people don't realize just how fat they are because they're just sort of measuring themselves against where they've always been. They've never really been down to contest shape or seen themselves in that, so they can't really identify what it feels like to be absolutely 8 to 6%. But the problem with saying that I'm happy with my weight and I just want to lose fat is that recomposition is very, very slow. Now, I have stated in the past recomposition is possible, and I've laid out some ways to do that in recent videos, but recomposition is pretty slow. I'd also say it's impossible without hard resistance training and effective resistance training. Also, there are limits to recomposition as well. So there are limits to how much you can keep the scale the same and still keep getting better. So no one got into stage shape by recomping, right? And conversely, no one who's 300 pounds is going to just recomp into Roddy Coleman, because that doesn't happen. But people think this stuff does happen. People think that's the way they want it to be. But most of the time, for people who actually want to diet, the scale should move, and that's the point of this first bit. So next, how do we actually go about measuring progress? How do we know that week to week we're making progress towards our fat loss goals? Firstly, measure your body weight 3 to 7 times a week and form a weekly average. Use the weekly average. Now, this one drives people absolutely nuts. I've seen people on Reddit go crazy about this. People will weigh 1 or 2 pounds higher one day, 1 or 2 pounds lower one day, and they will just go nuts. The very first thing that you have to do as a coach, or you guys have to do by yourselves, is you have to acknowledge that water weight fluctuations will be the majority of what you see on the scale. So you have to use a weekly average. But even the weekly average is prone to some water weight manipulations. So women, for example, can and should extend this to more of a 2 to 4 week time frame to ensure that they know they're losing fat, rather than just measure things week to week. But yeah, I think it's an important misconception to address straight away, because if someone's going into the diet thinking the 1 pound I gain and lose every day is fat, then they are going to cause themselves and their coach a big headache every time they weigh themselves. They'll be panicking and freaking out. Stop doing that in the nicest way possible. Please stop doing that. You don't need to worry about daily fluctuations. Worry about the weekly fluctuations. Okay. And even then, in the case of women, they should think a little bit more long term than that. Second way to measure progress is use pictures. Now, I would suggest pictures to be taken roughly every month. I would also say do the pictures in the same lighting and the same pose from month to month. I don't get it very often anymore, but when I first started off coaching, I would ask for progress pictures and they would be wildly different from month to month. So one month they were in the bedroom just by themselves. Another month they were out on the beach. I had that one. I had that once. I had a progress picture a month after somebody had sent me a progress picture when they're on the beach. I just thought it was amazing. Full lit, sun out, ice cream, everything. How do you compare? How do you possibly compare that? It was insane. Hilarious though. And final thing is, in terms of measuring progress, is strength and reps. So you should be at least attempting to maintain most of your strength and your repetitions. I think particularly in the first set of an exercise, that's really important. So for a lot of people, their repetitions might drop off in subsequent sets, which is fine, which is not a big deal. Your strength in your first set is probably more indicative of your overall muscle mass rather than the subsequent sets, because the more you're on a diet, the more just tired you get, so the less energy you have to do subsequent sets. I think the first set is the biggest indicator. That's kind of what I would base the progress on. So aim to keep, a decent amount of strength. I say, as a rough, in terms of what I've seen, guys who've lost more than 20 or 30 pounds are probably going to lose some strength, but then that is fine within the context of their just bodies getting smaller. And it's normally in the bench press, less so in the squat, even less so in the deadlift. So just bear that in mind. I mean, there will be some minor decreases, but if you're getting weaker on, say, machine isolation exercises, then there's a problem. All right. Okay. But yeah, in general, try and maintain strength as much as possible. When you get to the extreme ends of a cut, more than 30 pounds or so, then you're going to have those problems. But anyway, that's not most people. So next, what is a decent rate of weight loss? I think 0.5 to 1% of total body weight per week is awesome. So that's 0.5% to 1% of total body weight per week. Now, for a 200-pound male, it's about 1 or 2 pounds. For a 140-pound female, it's about 0.7 to 1.4 pounds. There are exceptions to this. The closer you get to being very, very lean, think like contest shape, all of that goes out the window. You just ignore that and you're mostly just looking at the mirror from day to day or week to week. So, but that last paragraph doesn't apply to most people. So don't use that as your rule of thumb for general dieting. Okay, most of you are not contest prep bodybuilders. Next, let's talk about slow fat loss. Now, this is often touted as a better way to lose fat. So if I say 1 or 2 pounds, people will go, well, actually, I want to lose 0.5 pound per week. Or you'll get that. I mean, there was a time not long ago where really, really slow fat loss was prized as some sort of amazing thing you need to look forward to. It sounds great in principle. The whole idea is people try and sell you on it by saying you reduce diet fatigue, it makes it less easy, makes it more easy, it leads to less binging. But I don't think that's true. The biggest risk is that if you are dropping weight, dropping body fat just really, really slowly, the biggest risk is it just leads to being on the diet for an unreasonable length of time. You're just on the diet for ages. And so all of your hormonal levels, your health and all that kind of stuff, they're still taking a dive. Like your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis is still going down. And as you lose more and more body fat, this continues to go down. It's just that you're just doing it really slowly. So it's just going to take longer. That's not so good. You could get better results by just speeding up a little bit within my parameters. So the big problem is the diet just turns into this unreasonable length. Fat loss starts to become a lifestyle you kind of identify with rather than a temporary phase that you complete and go and you're over with. Like most of you will know somebody who's basically always on a diet. Like quick hands up, comment, like, if you know somebody who's just always on a diet, who's seemingly just always on a diet. Now, the problem with those people is it goes hand in hand with binging and crashing off the diet. Like, I know a guy who's literally been on a diet, quote unquote, for like 20 years. Every 2 or 3 years, he goes onto his Facebook and he's got a new transformation. And he always looks the same, if not worse. So he basically spends 2.5 years just binging, crashing off the diet, gaining what is about 60 pounds. In his case, spends like 6 months dieting and puts his picture up and everyone's like, yeah, you're doing great, fantastic. But he's been doing that for 20 years. So dieting just becomes, fat loss becomes just a lifestyle, and that's all they know. So it ends up being entrenched in their habits. And you see a lot of people like this, they only know how to do diet in 2 ways, either cutting, usually really fast and inappropriately, or just binging. There's no middle ground with those people. So you never teach yourself maintenance. You just identify with being the guy on a diet all the time, or just going off. There's never any education around actually eating at maintenance. So yeah, it seems to go hand in hand with binge eating and crashing off the diet. And the other problem with going too slow is, well, we can just get more fat loss by going a little bit harder. If you try and lose 0.5 pound for 12 weeks, like 6 pounds, you could do that. If you were a largish male, you could do that in 3 weeks. Huge advantages. It's done in 3 weeks. You're over with. Move on with your life. Also, probably the final problem with really slow weight loss is tracking itself becomes problematic. So how do we realistically track 1/4 pound, even 0.5 pound, even when using a weekly average? We are still prone to those swings. You could be more stressed 1 week, less stressed another. Could be sun shining, sleep is better or worse. That all affects water weight, and it can contribute to the weekly average. So if you lose a good 1 to 2 pounds, that will show up in your weekly average, and you can be fairly certain you're on the right track. And it will probably be matched with changes in the mirror and measurements and all that kind of stuff. So that's problems with going really slow. Now, what are the problems with going really fast? Well, that sounds great, right? Most people say, I want fat loss and I want it now. I'll do anything, coach. And the one that I always love to hear is, this worked for me last time. Trust me. I'm like, does anyone notice anything? What's wrong with that sentence? This fast fat loss worked for me last time. If it works so well, why are we doing it again? Right? So essentially, the problem here is the very, very large deficits. They can lead to a lot of hunger. And this is what I see in people. If someone's used to eating about 3,000 calories and they all of a sudden jump onto 1,800, 1,600, there are so many alarm signals going off. Like, just even stretching the stomach doesn't happen. They're constantly hungry. They're constantly thinking about food. They're constantly distracted. They're just hangry. That's a problem. It's not pleasant to live with that all the time. You can power through it for a while, but it tends to have a very hard snapback. Second problem is you're more than likely going to get some performance loss just due to nutrient deficiencies or just simply not being glycogen full. So there's probably going to be some performance drops in the gym. Now, even if you get a bit funny with meal timing, the problem with performance loss in the gym is even if you're eating enough protein and you're training, if your performance is going down drastically, you can't argue that you're not losing muscle. That's a problem. That's a big problem, because then that just exacerbates the problem on the other end. If you rebound out of that diet, then you'll just gain more fat on, and it's less likely you're going to could be at the same body composition. I mean, the science on that is less than clear, but in terms of what I've seen guys diet into shows and then binge out of them, and they come out looking worse. So in my experience, from what I've seen, the binge yo-yo dieting thing is very much leads to less muscle mass and more body fat over time, which can exacerbate the problem if it's done over a lifetime. Going back to my previous example of this guy who's been dieting for 20 years, it's exactly what he does. Goes on to a fast cut, is all motivated, binges for 3 years, does the same thing ad infinitum. He's done it probably 6 or 7 times over the last 20 years. So not great. The other problem with going super fast is it crashes your energy levels, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. The problem with that is 1,000 calorie deficit is almost immediately not 1,000 calorie deficit, because your energy levels will crash. You'll be moving around less. You'll be expending less energy. So that could be reduced by a few hundred calories right from the first day or second day or third day. just because you're more tired. So it's not worth going that hard unless you really know what you're doing or unless you've got a lot of fat to lose. Basically, your hormones, your health, and enjoyment of life all go south. So it's not great. Now, what's best? I generally think that between 0.5% to 1% of body weight per week is best. As stated, this is assuming you're at a reasonable body fat. If you're very low body fat, go slower. If you're very high body fat, go faster. Begin with the assumption you're not a special snowflake. Now, just as a bit of a sort of a side tangent here, I have been a vocal proponent of faster diets in the past, so larger deficits. However, that is with a caveat. And that is, it's generally not acceptable for people who are at a reasonable body fat level. I have done it with great success for people who are very, very fat. And most people are a lot fatter than they think they are. Men at a genuine 25% body fat, which is not, if you look at a guy who's a genuine 25% body fat on the street, you wouldn't automatically think he's that fat. They tend to be far more open to faster rates of fat loss. Like if you're a guy and you're reasonable height, like 5'10", 5'11", whatever, and you weigh in the region of 100 kilos or more, odds are you probably are in the region of 30, maybe even 40% body fat. You just don't think you are because you've never really got down to stage shredded. Now you've got to bear in mind, now I'm a pretty big guy, reasonably big, and I hit stage at 180. So I had to drop 40 pounds to hit stage, and I wasn't in bad condition to begin with. So most people who are at those weights, 220-ish, and who think, yeah, I'm fine, I'm only about 20% body fat, they're probably a lot closer to 50, 40, So I have been more of a proponent of large deficits in the past, but generally it's for the right appropriate populations. And again, the research does support this. So that is all in line with my recommendations. Assuming your normal body weight, the 0.5% to 1% generally applies. So in summary, most people want to lose weight between 0.5% to 1% body weight per week. And that sort of naturally equalizes itself for the size of the person. A 200-pound male versus a 140-pound female generally works out to be well. I would also say don't try and turn a 12-week cut into an all-year extravaganza because you're just being nice to myself, or what's the term they say, I don't know, being good to yourself. Just because I'm being good to myself, no. I'm thinking about me, so I'm treating myself. That's why I'm going to just go easy on my diet this week. No, because all that will do is it'll turn a 12-week cut into like a whole year extravaganza. Treat yourself. Maybe just stick to the diet and then be over with. That could be treating yourself. Equally, don't try and cram 12 weeks into 3 weeks, or you're likely going to burn out unless you really know what you're doing, or you are very, very fat. I think leaner people and those who generally have a harder time dieting should lose slower because you already have a track record of not being able to diet very well. I think fatter people and those who have an easier time of dropping body fat should lose faster. And that's often where you see these golden combinations where former athletes have gotten out of shape and they cut down really fast and really easy, and it looks great. But yeah, be appropriate when it comes to how fast you lose fat. Also, use reasonable, objective tracking parameters to measure progress. The scale should move, okay? So use your body weight. Also use the mirror, and also use strength. All right, folks, so I guess a relatively basic video there, but I think it's something that's worth discussing. Also, when you're in the middle of a diet, it's generally when your mind starts playing tricks on you, so even basic stuff needs to be repeated. And hopefully you guys learned something from how I track progress, how I establish parameters for what a reasonable cut is, because I think it's important to plan. Any one of my clients will tell you, like, I plan things so we both know what to expect. And if you're coaching yourself, you should have an idea of, okay, here's my timeline, here's roughly what I want to do. Open to change, of course, but here's roughly what I want to do, because it allows you to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it allows you to do things in a phasic approach. So there are changes. We don't want to be dieting all year. See what you can do in 12 weeks, put your all into it, and then it's done. It's over with. Go to maintenance, do something else for a while, give your body a break, apply a new stimulus. And it works very well. If you do it cyclical, once you've been bulking for a while, you'll be like, that's it, I'm done with bulking. I can't stand bulking anymore. I want to cut. And it is a natural rhythm to things. All right, folks, I'm going to call it there. Hopefully you guys found something useful in that, and I will speak to you in the next one.